You didn't lose yourself, you were replaced. And the difference matters because lost things can be found. Lost things are somewhere waiting to be recovered. Replaced things are gone, overwritten, systematically dismantled and reconstructed into something else entirely. I spent 3 years being replaced, 3 years of small substitutions, minor adjustments, gradual transformations, each one seeming reasonable at the time. Each one presented as growth or compromise or love by the time. I recognized what had happened. The original version felt like a stranger, like someone I used to know a long time ago. Someone whose preferences and boundaries and opinions I could barely remember. I'm 29, I left 6 months ago, and I'm still trying to excavate the original from underneath the replacement. Still trying to figure out which preferences are actually mine and which ones I adopted to keep peace. Still trying to distinguish between boundaries I chose to dissolve and boundaries that were systematically eroded. The replacement was so complete, so thorough, that sometimes I can't tell where he ends and I begin. Can't identify which thoughts are mine and which thoughts I learned to think. Can't separate my authentic self from the version I became to survive him. The replacement wasn't violent, wasn't dramatic, wasn't something I could point to and say, that's when it happened. That's the moment I stopped being me. It was surgical, methodical, one preference replaced at a time, one boundary rewritten, one opinion shifted slightly, then shifted again. So gradual, I didn't notice until the replacement was complete, until I looked in the mirror one morning and didn't recognize the person staring back. Not physically, the face was the same, but everything else had changed. The way I held myself, the way I dressed, the expressions I made, all calibrated to someone else's preferences, all optimized for someone else's comfort. 3 years to replace me entirely, 3 years of systematic substitution, piece by piece, layer by layer, until what remained looked like me but functioned entirely for him, existed to make his life easier, had been redesigned to require less, to accommodate more, to bend, without breaking, to adjust, without complaining, to disappear, without leaving the person who emerged. After 3 years, had my name, my memories, my body, but none of my original preferences. None of my original boundaries, none of my original opinions. I'd been completely reconstructed. When you find yourself unable to remember your own preferences, when you can't recall what you used to like before you liked what he liked, when your boundaries have become so flexible you're not sure you have any left, when you look in the mirror and see someone familiar but fundamentally different, you haven't lost yourself, you've been replaced. The distinction matters because lost implies. Carelessness lost implies the original is somewhere retrievable. Replaced means gone, means overwritten, means the original has been systematically dismantled and something else built in its place. If you've ever thought I don't know who I am anymore, if you've caught yourself unable to answer simple questions about your own preferences, if you've realized you can't remember the last time you had an opinion that was in his opinion, if you've noticed you've become someone you don't recognize, don't comment, just notice it. Notice the replacement. Notice how complete it is. Notice that it happened without you consciously choosing it, because what I'm about to describe is the mechanism of replacement. How someone takes who you are and systematically substitutes it with who they need you to be. How the replacement happens so gradually, you participate in your own erasure without recognizing that's what you're redoing. I met him when I was 23, just finished graduate. School, starting my career, moving to a new city, building a new life. I felt strong, independent, clear about who I was and what I wanted had. Specific tastes in music and food and how I spent my time. Had firm boundaries about what I would and wouldn't accept. Had strong opinions on politics, on ethics, on how relationships should function. Knew myself well, trusted my own judgment, felt solid in my identity. He seemed to love that about me initially, seemed attracted to my independence, my clarity, my self-possession, said he valued how I knew my own mind, how I didn't need him to complete me. The first replacement was music. And I need to tell you about this one in detail because it shows exactly how the mechanism works. How something that seems trivial becomes evidence of systematic reconstruction. I loved indie rock, folk music, acoustic singer-songwriter stuff, albums I discovered in college and graduate school. Music that felt like mine, that connected to specific memories, specific moments in my development. I had playlists for different moods, different activities, music for cooking, music for working, music for driving, music for sadness, music for joy. Music was how I processed emotion, how I marked time, how I created atmosphere in my space. It was part of my identity. He preferred electronic music, house, techno, upbeat rhythms, said my music was too slow, too melancholic, said it brought the energy down. The first time he said it, we were in my car. I had my playlist on, something acoustic and gentle. He reached over and changed it without asking, said, "Let's find something more energetic, something that matches the vibe." I felt a small pang of something. Discomfort, maybe, violation. But I said nothing, told myself it was just one car ride, just one song, didn't matter. But it kept happening. Every time we were in the car together, he'd change my music. Every time we were at my apartment, he'd ask if we could play something more upbeat. Said he associated my music with sadness, said it made him feel heavy, made him uncomfortable. I started playing his music when he was around. Told myself I was being accommodating. Told myself it was temporary. Told myself I could listen to my music when he wasn't there. But gradually, even that stopped. His comments had created an association. My music became linked with his discomfort, with causing a problem, with being too much. I'd reach for it when alone and hear his voice saying, "It's too sad." It brings the energy down. I started choosing his music instead. Told myself I was discovering new genres, expanding my tastes, becoming less rigid. Didn't recognize I was replacing my authentic preferences with his. Didn't see this was the first substitution in a pattern that would eventually replace everything. The second replacement was my friend group, happened around month 4, subtle like the music. He never said don't see your friends, never forbid anything. Just made observations, planted seeds. Your friend Sarah seems kind of dramatic, always has some crisis, your friend. Mike talks about himself, a lot doesn't really ask about you. Your college friends are still acting like they're in college, don't you think? Once he named these things, I started seeing them. Started noticing Sarah's intensity, Mike's self-focus, my college friends' immaturity. Behaviors that hadn't bothered me before suddenly felt problematic. Suddenly felt like evidence my friends weren't good for me. His friends became our friends. We started spending more time with them. They were calmer, more settled, more aligned with his energy. I told myself this was natural. Told myself couples merge social circles. Didn't notice that the merging was one-directional. That I was spending time with his friends while he never spent time with mine. Didn't notice that my friendships were fading while his remained strong. Gradually, I saw my friends less, saw his friends more, not because he forbid it, but because he made it inconvenient, made plans that conflicted with theirs, expressed subtle disappointment when I chose them over time with him, seemed hurt when I prioritized other relationships. The friction of maintaining my friendships became greater than the ease of letting them fade. I let them fade. I let them fade. Told myself it was natural attrition. Told myself people grow apart. Didn't recognize I was being isolated from people who knew my original version, from people who might notice the replacement happening. By month 6, my eating habits had changed. I'd been vegetarian since college. Ethical conviction based on reading I'd done about industrial agriculture, animal welfare, environmental impact. It wasn't casual. It was a deeply held belief, something I thought through carefully. Something that felt aligned with my values. He ate meat, said he respected my choice, but found it limiting, found it difficult to cook together, found it inconvenient when choosing restaurants. Started asking if I'd consider being flexible, just occasionally, just for convenience, just so we could share meals more easily. I started eating fish, Told myself it was just fish, just for flexibility. Then chicken at dinners with his family because it seemed rude to refuse. Then meat generally because maintaining the distinction felt performative. Felt like I was making things difficult. I told myself my vegetarianism had been about health anyway, not ethics. Told myself I could always go back to it later. Didn't recognize my values being replaced with his convenience, my ethical framework being substituted with whatever made his life easier. Didn't see that. Replacing my diet was replacing my belief system, was changing not just what I ate, but who I was at a fundamental level. The replacement accelerated through year one. My style changed. I'd always dress casually. Jeans and sweaters. Comfortable, practical clothes that let me move through the world without thinking about my appearance. He preferred more feminine presentation. Started buying me dresses as gifts, dresses I wouldn't have chosen for myself, more fitted, more traditionally feminine than my usual style. He'd compliment me enthusiastically when I wore them, say I looked beautiful, looked sophisticated. Looked like I was finally dressing my age. I started wearing them more often. Started buying similar clothes. Started dressing the way he preferred. Told myself I was elevating my style, becoming more put together, more professional. Didn't recognize my appearance being replaced, my visual identity being rewritten to match his aesthetic preference. My career ambitions shifted. I planned to pursue a PhD. Had been working toward it for years. Had applications almost ready. Saw it as the natural next step in my development. He said that's a lot of years, a lot of stress, a lot of time living on a stipend. Asked if I'd really thought it through. Asked if I was sure that's what I wanted. Asked if I'd considered the impact on our relationship, on our future, on our ability to build a life together. Planted enough doubt that I delayed the applications. Then didn't submit them at all. Told myself I could do it later. Told myself maybe he was right. Maybe I wasn't cut out for academia. Maybe I was being unrealistic. Didn't recognize my future being replaced. My trajectory being substituted with a version that required less of me, that kept me more available, that made me more dependent on him. My sleep schedule changed. I'd always been a night person, stayed up late reading or working, slept in when possible. Felt most creative and energetic in evening hours. He was a morning person, needed early bedtimes and early wake times to function. Said my schedule was unhealthy. Said I'd feel better with more structure. Said staying up late meant we weren't sleeping at the same time. Weren't connected. I shifted my entire circadian rhythm, started going to bed at 9, waking at 5. Told myself it was healthier. Told myself I had more energy this way. Ignored the fact that I felt constantly tired, constantly fighting my natural rhythm. Didn't recognize even my biology being replaced, my body being retrained to operate on his schedule. By the end of year one, I replaced my music taste, my friend group, my diet, my style, my career plans, my sleep schedule. Each replacement had seemed minor in isolation, had seemed like normal relationship compromise, like flexibility, like growth, like maturity. I didn't see the pattern, didn't recognize that all the replacing flowed one direction, that I was accommodating everything while he accommodated nothing, that I was being systematically reconstructed while he remained exactly as he'd always been, unchanged, uncompromised, whole. My relationship with my family shifted in year 2. He made subtle observations, pointed out patterns I hadn't noticed. Your mom is kind of controlling, always has opinions about your choices. Your sister seems competitive with you, always trying to one-up your accomplishments. Your dad doesn't really listen when you talk, just waits for his turn to speak. Once he named these things, I couldn't unsee them. Started feeling bothered by behaviors that hadn't bothered me before. Started feeling uncomfortable during family visits. Started creating distance, calling less frequently, visiting less often. Told myself I was establishing healthy boundaries. Told myself I was growing up, becoming more independent. Didn't recognize I was being separated from my origin point, from people who knew me before the replacement, From family who might notice I was becoming someone else, might intervene, might ask questions I couldn't answer. My opinions changed on politics, on social issues, on ethics, on everything. I'd had strong positions, clear beliefs, considered myself well-informed, engaged. He challenged them gently, present alternative perspectives, asked me to consider other viewpoints, suggest I was being too rigid, too ideological. Over time, my position softened, became more moderate, became more aligned with his. I told myself I was becoming less dogmatic, more nuanced, more open-minded. Didn't see my worldview being replaced, my intellectual framework being substituted with his, my way of thinking being rewritten to match his perspective. There was a moment in year 2 where I almost saw it, almost recognized what was happening. I was getting ready to go out. Stood in front of my closet full of clothes, most of which he'd bought or I'd bought to match his taste, trying to decide what to wear. I stood there for 10 minutes, completely paralyzed, realized I didn't know what I wanted to wear, didn't have a preference. Every option felt equally foreign, equally not mine. I felt panic rising, felt like I was disappearing, like I didn't exist as a distinct person with distinct preferences. I almost saw it then, almost recognized the replacement, but I dismissed it, told myself I was just being indecisive that day, told myself everyone goes through phases of not knowing what they want, told myself I was overthinking, didn't let myself see it was systematic, was evidence of replacement, was a warning I should have heeded. Year 2, the replacement extended to smaller things, daily rituals, minor preferences, things so small I didn't consciously notice they were changing. I'd always loved coffee, the ritual of making it in the morning, the smell, the taste, the quiet moment before the day started. He didn't drink coffee, said caffeine made him anxious, asked if I'd mind not making it in the morning because the smell bothered him. Bothered his stomach, I switched to tea, told myself it was healthier anyway, told myself caffeine was probably bad for me. Didn't recognize even my morning ritual being replaced, even my small daily pleasures being substituted with whatever didn't inconvenience him. I'd always loved reading fiction, spent hours with novels, literary fiction mostly. Stories that transported me, that made me think, that connected me to other perspectives and experiences. He didn't read fiction, said it was a waste of time, said nonfiction was more valuable, more educational, more practical. I started reading what he read, business books, self-help, productivity literature. Told myself I was broadening my interests, becoming more well-rounded. Didn't see my inner life being replaced, my imagination being substituted with his utilitarian worldview, my escape being eliminated because he didn't value it. My vocabulary changed. I started using his phrases, his expressions, his way of describing things. Started seeing the world through his language. My own voice became less distinct, became an echo of his voice. People started commenting on it, saying we talked alike, saying we even used the same phrases. I thought it was sweet, thought it was evidence of closeness, didn't recognize my voice being replaced, my language being overwritten, my way of thinking being fundamentally altered by adopting his linguistic patterns. My hobbies disappeared. I loved painting. Hadn't been particularly skilled, but enjoyed the process, the meditation of it, the way it let me express things I couldn't express verbally. He said it was messy, said paint supplies took up too much space in my apartment, said the smell of turpentine bothered him. I stopped painting, packed up my supplies, told myself I'd lost interest naturally, told myself I'd outgrown it, didn't see my creative outlet being replaced with nothing, my expression being eliminated because it inconvenienced him, because it took up space he wanted for other things. I'd loved hiking, spent weekends on trails, being in nature, moving my body, feeling connected to something larger than myself. He preferred staying inside, said outdoor activities were too unpredictable, too weather dependent, too much effort for uncertain reward. I stopped going, Told myself I was becoming more of a homebody. Told myself I preferred quiet weekends. Didn't recognize my physical practice being replaced. My connection to nature being severed. My body becoming more sedentary to match his preference for indoor comfort. The replacement wasn't just mental and emotional, it was physical. My body began to reflect the replacement in ways I didn't consciously register. My posture changed. I started taking up less space, shoulders slightly curved inward, head slightly down, movements more compact, more contained. I'd see video of myself from before and the difference was visible. The original me moved differently, gestured more broadly, took up more space, held herself straighter. The replaced version moved smaller, quieter, less obtrusively. My body had learned to accommodate by literally shrinking. My gestures changed, became more reserved, more controlled. I used to talk with my hands, used to be animated when excited, used to take up space when expressing enthusiasm. Gradually that stopped. I learned to keep my hands still, to express excitement quietly, to contain my energy so it didn't overwhelm him. Didn't demand too much attention. Didn't take up space he might want for himself. My body had been retrained at a fundamental level. Had learned that being big was problematic, that taking up space caused friction, that making myself smaller made everything smoother. Even the way I walked changed. I watched old video from college, saw myself walking across campus, long strides, purposeful pace, taking up the full width of the sidewalk, present in my body, confident in my right to occupy space, then watched. Recent videos saw myself walking differently, smaller steps, body slightly to the side, making room for others even when unnecessary. The physical manifestation of replacement, my body literally reshaped to take up less room, to be less present, to accommodate by shrinking. Year 3, I started having dreams about the old me. Vivid dreams where I was her again, where I had her preferences, her boundaries, her clarity. I'd wake up feeling profound grief, feeling lost, not understanding at first what. I was grieving, thinking maybe I was depressed, maybe something was wrong with me, didn't have language for it yet, didn't understand I was mourning my own replacement, mourning the version of myself that had been systematically dismantled, mourning someone who was technically still alive but functionally gone. I'd look through old photos compulsively, pictures from college and graduate school, from before I met him, see someone I barely recognized. Not just physically though, that too, but the energy in the photos, the presence. The way that person inhabited space, smiled at the camera, stood next to friends. She seemed more solid, more real, more actually there than the person I'd become. I'd stare at these photos trying to remember what it felt like to be her, trying to access her internal experience, her preferences. Her thoughts couldn't reach her. She was gone, replaced so completely. I couldn't even remember her accurately. I found old journals from age 22, 23, read entries I'd written about my beliefs, my plans, my relationships, my values. The person who wrote those entries had opinions I no longer held, preferences I no longer recognized, dreams I'd completely abandoned, boundaries I'd dissolved entirely. I read these entries like reading about a stranger, couldn't connect to that person, couldn't understand how I'd transformed so completely from her into this, couldn't identify the specific moments where the transformation had occurred because it had been so gradual, so imperceptible, so disguised as growth and maturity and love. I tried making a list of my current preferences, things I genuinely liked independent of him. Sat with a blank page for an hour, couldn't complete it. Everything I wrote down was something he liked, something I'd adopted from him, something that served him or made his life easier. I had no preferences that existed independently, no tastes that were purely mine, no boundaries that didn't accommodate him. First, the list made the replacement undeniable, made it impossible to pretend I was still me underneath. I'd been so thoroughly replaced that independent preferences no longer existed. I was a construction designed for his comfort. My therapist was the first person to name it clearly, to give me language for what had happened. I'd been in therapy for months talking around it, describing the feeling of not recognizing myself, of not knowing what I wanted, of feeling like I'd disappeared. She'd been patient, asking questions, waiting for me to see it myself. Finally, one session, she asked me directly, asked me to describe my preferences, my boundaries, my opinions. I started answering, heard myself saying, I don't know, I'm not sure, whatever works. I'm flexible about that. She stopped me, said, when's the last time you stated a preference without qualifying it, without softening it, without making it optional? I couldn't remember, couldn't think of a single recent example. She let that sit for a moment, then said something that changed everything, said you haven't lost yourself, and I need you to hear the distinction. Lost implies the original still exists somewhere waiting to be found. You've been replaced. There's something else there now, something that looks like you, sounds like you, has your name and your body, but functions entirely for him. You've been systematically reconstructed. The word replacement landed differently than lost, felt more accurate, more true, more terrifying. She asked me to try an exercise, asked me to remember the person I was at 23. Before I met him, asked me to list that person's preferences, boundaries, opinions, values. I started making the list, writing quickly. Music taste, friend group, career plans, political views, hobbies, style, dietary choices, sleep schedule. The list grew, became extensive. She asked me to make a second list, current preferences, boundaries, opinions, values. That list was much shorter. Mostly blank spaces, mostly, I don't know. I'm not sure, whatever he prefers. We put the lists side by side. The contrast was devastating, undeniable. Every single item on the original list had been replaced. Systematically, completely nothing remained. I'd been entirely reconstructed. She asked how I felt seeing it laid out like this. I couldn't speak, started crying, not sad, crying recognition. Crying grief, crying the kind of crying that comes from finally seeing something you've been avoiding, from having something named that you couldn't name yourself. That session broke something open, shattered whatever denial had been protecting me. I went home, looked in the mirror with new eyes, really looked, saw the replacement clearly for the first time, saw how everything about my presentation had been calibrated to his preferences, how my hair was styled the way he liked it, longer than I'd ever worn it before, how my clothes were all chosen for his taste, feminine and fitted and nothing like what I'd worn at 23, how my makeup was applied to his standard, more than I'd ever worn before, how even my facial expressions had changed, softer, less animated, less me. I saw it in my posture, saw how I stood smaller, saw how I held myself differently, saw how the replacement had been so thorough it extended to the physical, to how I inhabited my body, how I moved through space. I'd been rebuilt from the outside and the visible me replaced first, then the replacement working deeper into preferences, into opinions, into values, into identity itself, until there was nothing left that predated him, nothing left that existed independent of him. I started systematically documenting the replacement, making lists of everything that had changed. The list was pages, long, overwhelming in its completeness. Music taste replaced friend group, replaced diet, replaced style, replaced career plans, replaced sleep schedule, replaced family relationships, replaced political opinions, replaced morning routines, replaced hobbies, replaced vocabulary, replaced voice, replaced gestures, replaced posture, replaced preferences, replaced boundaries, replaced values, replaced everything, replaced nothing, spared nothing, preserved total reconstruction. I understood then that replacement is fundamentally different from influence. Influence is mutual. Both people affect each other. Both people grow and change together in ways that feel organic. Feel chosen. Replacement is one-directional, systematic. One person remains unchanged while the other person is completely transformed. He hadn't been influenced by me at all, hadn't adopted any of my preferences, hadn't shifted any of his opinions, hadn't changed any of his behaviors. The transformation was entirely mine, entirely one way. entirely replacement disguised as compromise. The mechanism was brilliant in its subtlety. He never demanded I change, never explicitly told me to replace myself, never gave ultimatums or direct orders. He just stated his preferences clearly, expressed discomfort when I didn't accommodate them, rewarded my accommodation with warmth and approval, withdrew slightly when I maintained my preferences, created an environment where replacing myself was the path of least resistance, where adopting his preferences was smoother than maintaining mine, where disappearing was less conflictual than existing. I did all the work of replacing myself. He just created the conditions that made replacement easier than assertion. I left month 36, not because I'd fully understood the replacement, not because I'd reversed it, but because I'd seen it clearly enough to know I needed to leave, while some part of me still wanted to leave, while some small fragment of the original still existed that could recognize this wasn't right, that could see I'd been replaced, that could choose to leave, even though leaving meant abandoning the only version of myself I could currently access. Leaving meant not knowing who I'd be without him, meant having to rebuild from whatever remained. The first months after leaving were profoundly disorienting. I had to relearn myself, had to rediscover preferences that had been buried for years, had to rebuild boundaries that had been systematically dissolved, had to excavate opinions that had been completely replaced. Some things came back relatively easily, muscle memory of who I'd been. Some things were completely gone, overwritten so thoroughly I couldn't recover them, couldn't remember what I'd thought about certain topics, couldn't recall what I'd preferred, couldn't distinguish between authentic self and constructed self. I started systematically testing preferences, trying different things to see what resonated, what felt like me versus what felt like learned behavior. Tried my old music. Some of it felt right, felt like coming home. Some of it felt foreign, felt like it belonged to someone else. Tried new music entirely, built new preferences from scratch, tried my old style. Felt wrong, felt like costume, tried new styles, created something that felt more authentic than either the original or the replacement. Realized recovery wasn't about returning to the original. The original was gone. Recovery was about building something new from whatever fragments remained. I tried reconnecting with old friends, the ones who'd known me before, found that some friendships were recoverable. Some had been damaged beyond repair by my years of absence, by my replacement, by the fact that I couldn't explain where I'd been, who I'd become. Some friends welcomed me back. Some couldn't forgive the disappearance. I had to accept that some losses were permanent. Some parts of my old life were irretrievable. I tried returning to old hobbies, bought paint supplies, set up a small space in my apartment, stared at the blank canvas for weeks before I could make the first mark. The act of creating felt vulnerable, felt exposing, felt dangerous in ways it never had before. I'd been trained so thoroughly to not take up space, to not express myself, to not create mess or inconvenience, that even alone the training held, I had to consciously override it, had to give myself permission repeatedly, had to practice taking up space. 6 months out, I can state preferences more clearly than I could at first, can say I prefer this over that without immediately qualifying it, without softening it, without making it optional. But it still feels risky, still feels like I'm being demanding, still triggers the training that says my preferences are less important, should be subordinated, should be dissolved to prevent conflict the training runs. Deeper than conscious thought, embedded in reflexes and automatic responses. I can maintain boundaries more consistently now, can say no without extensive justification, without apologizing, without making it easier for the other person. But I still feel guilt, still feel like I'm being difficult, still hear his voice saying, I'm being rigid, being unreasonable, being selfish. The internal voice of the replacement lingers, even after the external source is gone, continues the work of replacement even in his absence. I can access opinions that feel genuinely mine, can think through issues and arrive at positions that feel authentic rather than adopted. but I still question them constantly, still wonder if they're really mine or if they're just another version of replacement. Just me trying to be different from him rather than actually being myself. The uncertainty is permanent, the replacement. Damaged my ability to trust my own knowing. Here's what I desperately wish someone had told me at 23 when I met him. When I was clear about who I was, when I had strong preferences and firm boundaries and distinct opinions, when I knew myself well and trusted my judgment, the first time someone asks you to replace your preference with theirs, notice it. Notice it's not mutual influence. Notice it's not balanced compromise. Notice that one person is changing while the other remains unchanged. Notice the direction of accommodation. Notice before you've replaced so much you can't remember who you were. Notice before the original is gone entirely. Notice while you still can. You didn't lose yourself. Lost implies accident, implies carelessness, implies the original is somewhere waiting to be recovered. You were replaced systematically, methodically, preference by preference, boundary by boundary, opinion by opinion, value by value, until what remained looked like you but functioned entirely for them. The replacement happened so gradually, you participated willingly, believed you were growing, believed you were compromising, believed you were becoming better, didn't recognize you were becoming someone else entirely, someone designed for their comfort rather than your authenticity. If you're reading this and you can't remember your own preferences, if you've become so accommodating, you're not sure you exist independently, if you look in the mirror and don't recognize who's looking back, if you've adopted all their opinions, dissolved all your boundaries, abandoned all your plans, restructured your entire life around their comfort, you haven't lost yourself. You've been replaced. And the path forward isn't about finding who you lost. It's about recognizing the replacement, understanding the mechanism, deciding whether to try recovering fragments of the original or building something entirely new from the material that remains. Recovery from replacement is archaeology, is excavation, is carefully uncovering what's underneath layers of reconstruction, is distinguishing between authentic self and constructed self, is rebuilding identity piece by piece, is learning to trust your own preferences again after years of replacing them with someone else's, is slow, is incomplete, is ongoing. Some parts of the original are recoverable. Some parts are gone forever. Some parts you might not want back. The work is figuring out which is which. The work is building something authentic from whatever remains. The work is accepting that you'll never be exactly who you were before, but you can become someone real, someone whole, someone who exists for yourself rather than for someone else. Tomorrow, I'll tell you about the moment I realized his apologies were identical, word for word, tone for tone. Realized every apology followed the same script, hit the same emotional beats, created the same temporary relief. Realized the apologies weren't about remorse or change or growth. They were about reset, about returning me to baseline so the cycle could continue, about erasing the incident so it wouldn't count toward the pattern, about making me forget just long enough to stay. And once I saw the apology as mechanism instead of emotion, once I recognized the script, I couldn't unsee it, couldn't accept it, couldn't let it work on me anymore.